She flew thousands of miles to speak up for children. She stood at one of the most respected platforms in the world. She had a message that genuinely mattered. And somehow, none of that became the story. When Meghan Markle arrived in Geneva to speak about children's online safety, what followed had nothing to do with the cause she came to champion. The conversation shifted entirely, and the specific way that happened reveals something far deeper. A quiet but very real challenge that follows Meghan every single time she steps in front of a camera. One that no amount of preparation can seem to fix.
Meghan Markle's shocking humiliation in Geneva finally proves that she has just gone mad.
And that gap between what she came to say and what the world actually chose to hear reveals more about her current reality than any headline ever could. This was not an isolated moment. Over the past year, it has become a deeply uncomfortable pattern following her every step, every carefully planned appearance, every boldly launched initiative. Somehow, the message she walks in with and the conversation she walks out leaving behind end up in completely different places. But Geneva was different. Geneva held up a mirror. Because this time, the contradictions didn't slowly build. They arrived fast, they arrived loud, and they arrived all at once, colliding in real time, in front of the entire world, at an event that was supposed to be about something genuinely important. So today, we are going to walk through exactly what unfolded that week. Not just the surface controversies, but the specific way they connected, compounded, and fed into each other. Because three separate problems, each manageable on its own, fused together into one devastating week. And here is what you need to understand from the very beginning. These threads did not run parallel. They pulled each other tighter with every passing day.
It was the moment, the major defeat on her face, when she realized that no one had bothered to show up for what was a catastrophic speech, a hypocritical speech, a speech which blows out of the water every single thing that she has argued in terms of her brand.
And understanding exactly how they did that is how you understand why Geneva unraveled so quickly, despite every advantage it had going in. The event itself was the World Health Organization's discussions on children's digital safety. Meghan appeared alongside WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus near Geneva's iconic Broken Chair Monument. That towering, recognizable installation outside the United Nations complex that has silently witnessed decades of global conversations about human rights and accountability. She delivered a speech, a serious one. She spoke about harmful algorithms, addictive platform design, artificial intelligence, and the urgent responsibility of governments and tech companies to build genuinely safer digital environments for children. She called for stronger protections. She drew a striking comparison, arguing that unregulated digital products would never be permitted on the market if they were physical products that caused the same level of documented harm. She pushed for international cooperation and real accountability in ways current regulation simply fails to deliver. On paper, it looked like exactly the platform she had been working toward since leaving royal life. International, credible, connected to an issue that resonates deeply with parents and policymakers across the entire political spectrum. The Arch-UL Foundation had been quietly building toward this kind of institutional credibility for years, positioning the couple not as former royals chasing relevance, but as legitimate advocates in the space of global child welfare and policy. Geneva was supposed to prove that positioning had finally arrived.
She was assigned to a bus stop. Look at that. Look at in the red circle. So actually, the woman who everyone's saying is there to watch was actually just trying to get home. Meghan's mole pointed out that even the Sussex squaddies couldn't be bothered to go to Geneva to support Meghan Markle.
And just like that, everything the event was carefully built to represent began to slip. The WHO partnership, the Geneva setting, the global subject matter, Every element had been deliberately chosen to send one clear message, that this was serious, credible, and meaningful. A moment where the image and the substance finally aligned. But within hours, the speech had been buried, not by a rival story, not by breaking news, but by the footage itself. Because the internet had spotted something. 3 things, actually. And by the end of that week, none of the conversation, not a single trending thread, was about children's digital safety. The first thing that caught people's attention was the crowd, or more precisely, what critics were calling the lack of one. As clips spread across social media, viewers began pausing, rewinding, and zooming in. What they saw was pedestrians strolling past without a second glance, cars moving freely, tourists drifting by, completely unbothered. The few people who appeared to be watching were, critics argued, almost certainly part of the event's own circle, staff, security, media, personnel. And then someone pointed out the detail that truly fueled the fire. The broken chair monument, standing just nearby, a beloved Geneva landmark that draws curious visitors every single day, seemed to be pulling more genuine public attention than the speech happening a few feet away. Within minutes, screenshots were everywhere. Clips were frozen mid-frame and dissected. And just like that, the narrative had already taken on a life of its own.
Relentless algorithms, exploitative engagement, and endless exposure to harmful content that they are not seeking out.
I guess 4-year-old Lily didn't seek out her starring role in selling Meghan's outfit either, did she?
Those critics who had long argued that Meghan's global influence was being overstated pointed to the images as evidence. But whether that was a fair measure or not almost didn't matter, because the narrative attached to those images spread faster than any correction could follow. And it spread at exactly the wrong moment. Just days earlier, photographs from Princess Catherine's engagements in Italy had generated the kind of coverage that follows senior royals wherever they go. Packed streets, crowds who had waited hours just to catch a glimpse, genuine, unscripted public enthusiasm. The contrast was immediate, and it was brutal. Social media placed both sets of images side by side. Some acknowledged the comparison wasn't entirely fair. A policy speech at an international organization is not a royal walkabout. But many didn't bother with that nuance. And the image spread anyway, feeding an existing narrative and pulling focus completely away from anything Meghan had actually said. The second thing people noticed was the Instagram post, and this one was harder to dismiss. Before arriving in Geneva, Meghan shared a photo of her 4-year-old daughter Lilibet at her feet, captioned as a sweet mama's little helper moment. Warm, relatable, the kind of content that generates millions of views. But the internet looked closer. Hanging visibly in the background were the exact clothes she would wear at the event. The blazer, the shoes, all carefully arranged and on full display. Critics argued it didn't look spontaneous. It looked composed, luxury fashion deliberately framed, with her daughter as the emotional anchor, released strategically ahead of a major international appearance. And then, just hours later, Meghan stood before cameras at the WHO event and delivered a passionate speech about the very real harm that comes from exposing children to public platforms without their consent. The contradiction didn't need any editorial framing. It was sitting right there in plain sight. Journalist Tom Sykes put it precisely: a 4-year-old cannot understand social media. A 4-year-old cannot consent to having their image shared with millions of strangers. And a partially hidden face doesn't grant privacy. In some cases, it generates even more curiosity. What made this criticism particularly cutting was where it was coming from. Not just long-standing royal skeptics, but people who had taken Meghan's stated position on children's privacy seriously, engaged with it honestly, and then applied that exact same logic to her own behavior. When your critics are using your own arguments against you, there is no easy way out. The third thing was a gesture, a tiny one, As Meghan reached the emotional close of her speech, cameras caught a brief split-second movement. She touched her nose. That was it. But this is Meghan Markle in 2026, and almost nothing goes unnoticed. Within hours, the clip was everywhere, slowed down, zoomed in, replayed on loop. Entire threads debated what it meant. Was she emotional, nervous, hiding something? The honest answer is almost certainly nothing. A completely natural physical reflex under the pressure of a high-stakes international address. But it landed in the worst possible context. The crowd questions were still running. The Instagram controversy hadn't resolved. The comparisons with Catherine were everywhere. And now there was one more clip to dissect, one more moment pulling attention further from the message. It became the perfect symbol for the entire Geneva week. Every time the focus seemed about to settle on the actual cause, something arrived to redirect it. On the substance, Meghan's argument was coherent and connected to a genuinely important global debate. Governments worldwide are already wrestling with social media restrictions for minors. Screen addiction, cyberbullying, algorithmic exploitation, these are real and serious policy questions. She was not wrong to raise them. But some listeners felt the speech drifted beyond child safety into broader territory: content moderation, algorithmic accountability, questions about what information people should be permitted to encounter online. For some, that was a natural extension of the argument. For others, it entered far more contested political space. The WHO's involvement added another layer of complexity. An organization built on medicine and public health stepping into digital content policy raised genuine questions about authority and expertise that serious observers weren't willing to simply ignore. By the end of the week, one uncomfortable truth was impossible to argue with. The story Meghan wanted people discussing was children's digital safety. The story the internet wanted to discuss was Meghan Markle, and those were never the same conversation. What makes this so difficult to fix is that every response makes it worse. Addressing the crowd comparison amplifies it. Explaining the Instagram post extends the contradicting. Engaging with the gesture keeps the clip alive for another cycle. The standard tools of denial and counter-narrative tend to deepen these wounds rather than heal them. The only real path forward is time. Consistency. A sustained period where the behavior and the stated values align closely enough, for long enough, that the contradictions begin to lose their grip. That cannot be delivered by one speech in one city. It requires dozens of decisions pointing quietly in the right direction over an extended period. Because the deeper problem Geneva exposed wasn't the crowd or the post or the gesture. It was something more structural. Meghan is now operating across 3 public identities simultaneously, and they are pulling against each other. There is Meghan, the global humanitarian advocate, serious, institutional, standing alongside world leaders, speaking about policy, demanding to be taken at face value. There is Meghan, the lifestyle brand, the composed family photographs, the outfit reveals, the commercially adjacent content that keeps the Sussex brand financially visible in ways speeches alone cannot sustain. And there is Meghan, the celebrity, permanently refracted through years of accumulated controversy, the Oprah interview, the Netflix documentary, the memoir, the palace accusations, a narrative that follows her into every new room whether she wants it there or not. These 3 versions don't coexist peacefully. The humanitarian is undermined when the brand becomes the story. The brand is complicated when it contradicts the humanitarian messaging, and both are constantly filtered through a controversy lens that makes neutral coverage almost structurally impossible. Geneva was supposed to prove she could operate cleanly in one lane without the others pulling the narrative off course. The week showed she cannot. Not yet. Not in this configuration. None of this means the cause is unimportant. Children's digital safety deserves serious attention from credible advocates, and none of it means Meghan cannot change. Reputations do shift. The gap between stated values and visible behavior can close, but only through sustained, consistent evidence accumulated over time, not through a single carefully designed event. That is the most honest thing that can be said about Geneva. Not that it was a disaster in isolation, but that it revealed a problem too large and too structural for any single appearance to resolve. So here is the question worth sitting with. Can Meghan eventually separate her advocacy from the controversies that keep pulling the conversation back to her personally? Or has the pattern become too established for any individual appearance to shift it? And if change is possible, what would it actually need to look like? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if this kind of analysis is what you come here for, a like genuinely helps us reach more people. See you in the next one.